Clean the bathroom or you get no dinner." The words weren't just spoken, they were barked. A cold, hard command that cut through the blare of the television and slammed into me the moment I stepped through the unlocked front door. The voice belonged to my son, Richard Rick, and it was aimed at his 6-year-old daughter, my granddaughter Molly. I had come to their new-build home in Cedar Grove, Ohio, expecting the familiar, happy chaos of a young family. I'd brought a cherry pie, still warm on the passenger seat of my car, its sweet scent a stark contrast to the stale air inside the house, a ghost of greasy pepperoni and sugary soda. The scene that greeted me was one of chaos, but none of it was happy. My gaze swept the open-plan living room. Empty pizza boxes were stacked precariously on a coffee table, surrounded by a sea of clear plastic cups. On the sprawling sectional couch, 2 boys lounged like princes, their eyes glazed over as they watched cartoons. They were Susan's sons, my stepsons-in-law, Chase, the 10-year-old, and Tony, who was 8. As Rick's voice faded, I saw Chase nudge his younger brother, a cruel little snicker passing between them. They didn't even turn their heads. Then I saw her, Molly. My sweet, quiet Molly, standing in the archway to the hall, her small frame swallowed by the cavernous, high-ceilinged house. In her tiny hands, she clutched an enormous yellow sponge, the kind you'd use to wash a car. It was bigger than her forearm. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bowed, her entire posture a study in trying to be invisible. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She just absorbed the command, her knuckles white around the sponge. My heart didn't just ache, it seized. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This house, with its gleaming countertops I'd helped pick out and its freshly painted walls, was supposed to be their fresh start, a safe haven, a foundation for their blended family. It was a foundation I had laid. Every penny of the down payment had come from my retirement savings, the money I had scraped together over 40 years of work, the nest egg that was meant to see me through my own quiet years. When the bank had hesitated because of Rick's spotty credit, I had co-signed the mortgage without a second thought. My name was on the legal documents holding this roof over their heads. My life's work was invested in these walls, walls that now echoed with threats against a child. I stood there, invisible in the doorway, putting the pieces together. The lazy, smirking boys on the couch, the trashed living room, the tiny girl being ordered to perform manual labor under threat of starvation. It was a picture of casual cruelty, and as it settled in my mind, I realized this wasn't just a bad moment I'd walked in on. This was a system. But before we continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We're really happy to know that our stories have reached people everywhere. The silence from Molly was the most damning thing of all. A child should argue, they should cry, or stomp their foot, or shout, "That's not fair." But Molly was silent. It was the practiced silence of someone who has learned that speaking only makes things worse. My blood ran cold. The warmth of the cherry pie felt like a mockery. I had bought this house for them. I had poured my future into this place, believing I was giving my son a leg up, giving my granddaughter a stable home after she'd lost her mother so tragically. I thought I was building a home. Instead, I had financed a prison. Rick finally noticed me. His face, which had been twisted in a scowl, shifted into a mask of strained surprise. "Mom, I didn't hear you come in." He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just stood there, waiting for me to pretend I hadn't heard, to smile and hand over the pie and play the part of the happy, oblivious grandmother. I looked from his face to the smirking boys, then back to Molly, who still hadn't moved, a tiny soldier awaiting her grim orders. The oversized sponge in her hand seemed to grow heavier, a symbol of a burden no 6-year-old should ever have to carry. And in that moment, the love and hope I had poured into this house curdled into something else, something hard and cold and sharp. They thought I was just a visitor. They thought my role was to provide the money and then fade into the background. They had forgotten one crucial detail. It wasn't their house, it was mine. My smile was a mask of porcelain, thin and brittle, threatening to crack. I held it in place as I handed the cherry pie to Rick, my hand steady despite the tremor I felt in my bones. "Just thought you all might like a little dessert," I said, my voice a stranger's in my own ears, calm, pleasant, utterly false. Susan appeared then, drawn by our voices. She glided into the room with a practiced ease, a bright, welcoming smile plastered on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Julia, what a wonderful surprise! You shouldn't have." She took the pie from Rick, her touch lingering on his arm for a moment too long. It was a gesture of ownership, a silent reminder of her place in this house, my house. "It was no trouble," I lied. The boys on the couch finally turned, their cartoon trance broken. They offered up lazy, mumbled hellos before their attention was recaptured by the flickering screen. But Molly remained frozen in the hallway, the oversized sponge still in her hand. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her entire being dedicated to the art of taking up less space. Susan's gaze flickered towards her, a flash of annoyance crossing her features before it was smoothed away. "Molly, honey, say hello to your grandmother," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. Molly's head lifted just enough for her eyes to meet mine. There was no light in them, no childish spark, just a deep, weary resignation. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered, the words barely audible. Then, as if the effort was too much, her gaze dropped back to the floor. I stayed for precisely 10 minutes, the socially acceptable minimum. I made small talk about the weather. I asked about their jobs. I pretended not to notice the way Rick's jaw was clenched, the way Susan's smile was stretched a little too tight, the way Molly had vanished into the recesses of the house, presumably to begin her penance in the bathroom. Every second was a performance. I was the doting mother, the loving grandmother, the benign benefactor who saw nothing, heard nothing, suspected nothing. As I finally made my excuses and walked to my car, Susan's cheerful, "Drive safe, Julia, come back soon," followed me like a curse. The moment the car door closed, the porcelain mask shattered. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, the cheap plastic cool against my skin, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It came out as a ragged, silent sob. The image of Molly's face, so small and so utterly defeated, was burned into the back of my eyelids. The threat in Rick's voice echoed in my ears. No dinner. For a 6-year-old girl. The drive home was a blur of suburban landscapes, tidy lawns, identical mailboxes, the wholesome facade of Cedar Grove. But my mind was a storm, tearing through the past, ripping away the comfortable illusions I had wrapped myself in for years. I had to face a truth I had long avoided. Rick had always been difficult. Difficult was the word I had always used, a soft maternal euphemism for a much harsher reality. As a teenager, it meant a simmering anger that could boil over without warning, punching a hole in his bedroom wall over a bad grade. As a young man, it meant a deep-seated entitlement, a core belief that the world, and specifically, I owed him something. He'd quit jobs because his boss disrespected him. He'd rack up credit card debt on frivolous things and then call me in a panic expecting a bailout. And I always had provided it. I had smoothed things over, paid the bills, made the excuses. I had told myself it was a mother's love. I see now it was a mother's enablement. I had taught him that his actions had no consequences. My thoughts drifted to his first wife, Sarah, Molly's mother. Sarah had been a balm to Rick's abrasive nature. She was sunshine and laughter, a woman with a gentle strength that seemed to soothe the worst of his impulses. With her, he was better, softer. For a few years, I'd allowed myself to hope that he had finally grown up. They had Molly, and for 3 beautiful years, they were a family. A real one. I remember visiting their little rented apartment, filled with the scent of Sarah's baking and the sound of Molly's giggles. Rick would be on the floor, letting his toddler daughter put barrettes in his hair, a genuine, unforced smile on his face. Then came the crash. A rainy night, a slick road, a drunk driver who ran a red light. Sarah was gone in an instant. Rick was left with a broken arm and a shattered life. and Molly, at just 3 years old, was left with a hole in her world that could never be filled. Grief does strange things to people. In Rick, it didn't soften him, it hardened him. His brief period of maturity evaporated, replaced by a bitter, resentful impatience. He was impatient with Molly's tears, with her confusion, with the simple, constant needs of a motherless toddler. He loved her, I told myself. He just didn't know how to do it alone. Less than a year later, Susan moved in. She came with her 2 sons, Chase and Tony, a ready-made family to slot into the void Sarah had left. On the surface, it seemed perfect. Rick wasn't alone anymore. Molly would have a mother figure. The boys would be like brothers to her. I wanted to believe it so badly that I ignored the first warning signs. The favoritism wasn't overt at first. It was a subtle poison seeping into the foundation of their new life. It was in the way Susan would buy new sneakers for Chase and Tony, but claim Molly's were still perfectly fine. It was in the way Rick would loudly praise Tony for kicking a soccer ball in the backyard, while Molly's carefully colored drawing, held up for his approval, went unnoticed. It was in the family movie nights where the choice was always a loud, explosive action movie that her boys loved, movies that sent Molly retreating into a corner with a book, making herself small. Slowly, insidiously, a pattern emerged. Molly, who had been a bright, bubbly toddler under Sarah's care, became hyper-quiet. She learned to move through the house like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the stairs. She flinched at raised voices, even if it was just Rick yelling at a football game on TV. Her default expression became one of cautious neutrality, her eyes constantly scanning the adults in the room, trying to read the temperature, to anticipate the next storm. She was trying to be invisible, because in that house, being seen was dangerous. The chores started under the guise of discipline and teaching responsibility. It sounded so reasonable when Susan explained it to me over the phone. "We just think it's important for all the kids to contribute," she'd said, her voice smooth as honey. "It builds character." But all the kids never meant all the kids. It only ever meant Molly. I remembered a visit last summer. Chase had left his muddy cleats on the new beige carpet. It was Molly, then 5 years old, who was given a scrub brush and a bowl of soapy water and told to clean it up. "You need to learn to be more responsible for the state of the house," Rick had told her sternly, as if she were the one who had made the mess. Chase and Tony were on the porch, eating popsicles Susan had just given them. I had said something then, a weak protest. "Rick, she's so little. Isn't that a bit much?" Susan had swooped in, placing a hand on my arm, her smile patronizing. "Oh, Julia, it's not a punishment, it's a life skill. We want her to grow up knowing the value of hard work. Sarah would have wanted that." Using Sarah's name, that was her masterstroke. It was a weapon she wielded with surgical precision, a way to shut down any argument, to frame her cruelty as a noble continuation of a dead mother's wishes. And I, fool that I was, had let her. I had backed down, swallowing my unease because it was easier than causing a scene. It was easier than admitting that the family I had invested in, the home I had paid for, was rotting from the inside out. By the time I pulled into my own condo's parking garage, the memories had coalesced into a single, horrifying truth. The scene I witnessed today wasn't an aberration. It was the system, refined and perfected over 3 years. Molly wasn't being taught responsibility. She was being broken. She was the family scapegoat, the designated servant, the sponge for all the ugliness and resentment in that house. Her brothers-in-law were being taught to look down on her. Her stepmother was methodically erasing her spirit. And her father was either a willing participant or a coward of such epic proportions that the distinction no longer mattered. I sat in the echoing silence of the garage for a long time. The cherry pie on the counter back in that house felt like a symbol of my own blindness, a sweet offering to a monster I had helped create. I had been so focused on giving my son a house, I hadn't paid attention to the home he was building inside it. The pain in my chest was immense, a physical weight of guilt and sorrow. But beneath it, something else was taking root. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, clear resolve that settled deep in my marrow. The years of making excuses, of looking away, of choosing a fragile peace over the difficult truth, they were over. I had enabled this. My money, my signature, my silence had all been bricks in the wall of Molly's prison. It was time to tear it down. Sleep was an impossibility. I spent the night pacing the plush carpet of my condo, the city lights of downtown Columbus glittering like cold, distant stars through my floor-to-ceiling windows. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Molly. I saw her small, hunched shoulders, the oversized sponge, the vacant look in her eyes. I heard Rick's voice, hard and unforgiving. No dinner. Each memory was a fresh turn of the knife. The quiet hum of my refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, every sound seemed to amplify the screaming silence of my complicity. How had I let it get this bad? The answer was as simple as it was shameful. I had chosen comfort over courage. I had accepted the curated version of their lives that Susan presented during holiday dinners and Rick offered in brief, non-committal phone calls. I saw the matching family Christmas sweaters and the smiling posed photos they posted on Facebook, and I allowed myself to believe in the fiction. It was easier. Admitting the truth would have meant admitting my own failure, my failure to raise a better man, my failure to protect my only grandchild. But the fiction had been ripped away. Now there was only the raw, ugly truth. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that what I had seen was not the worst of it. It was just the part they had grown careless enough to let me see. The real ugliness would be hidden, happening behind closed doors when they thought no one was watching. I made my decision before the first hint of dawn streaked the sky in shades of gray and violet. I wasn't going to call. I wasn't going to announce my arrival. Announcing myself would give them time to stage the scene, to force Molly into a clean dress and put a smile on her face. I needed to see the truth, unfiltered and unrehearsed. I had a spare key. Rick had given it to me after they first moved in, back when the pretense of a warm, familial relationship was still being carefully maintained. "Just in case of emergencies, Mom," he'd said with a rare, genuine smile. This was an emergency. I drove back to Cedar Grove as the sun was rising, the suburban streets quiet and sleepy. Lawns were wet with dew, and the only signs of life were the occasional newspaper delivery car and early morning joggers. The normalcy of it all felt obscene. Behind one of these perfectly manicured lawns, in a house that I was paying for, a little girl's spirit was being systematically crushed. I parked my car a block away, not wanting the familiar sight of my sedan to act as an alarm. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the quiet street, the crisp morning air doing nothing to calm my nerves. My hand trembled slightly as I slipped the key into the lock of the front door. I turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't click too loudly. The door swung open with a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. The house was quiet, but it was the charged quiet of a house that was awake. I could hear the low murmur of the television from the living room morning cartoons, no doubt for Chase and Tony. From the kitchen, I could hear the faint clink of dishes and the sound of running water. I followed the sounds, my sneakers making no noise on the polished hardwood floors. I stopped just before the archway to the kitchen, hidden from view. I held my breath and listened. And what I heard confirmed my every fear. "No, not like that. You're leaving streaks. Do it again." It was Susan's voice, sharp and laced with an icy impatience. "Honestly, Molly, it's not that hard. Your mother knew how to wash a dish, I'm sure. Even she could manage that." The jab was so cruel, so casually venomous, that it stole the air from my lungs, using Sarah's memory not just as a tool for control, but as a weapon of shame. My fists clenched at my sides. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me, so hot and fierce it nearly brought me to my knees. I peered around the edge of the doorframe. The scene was a nightmare of domestic tyranny. There was Molly, standing on a small plastic step stool so she could reach the deep farmhouse sink. The sink was filled with soapy water and the remnants of their breakfast cereal bowls, sticky syrup plates, a greasy frying pan. Her small arms, submerged to the elbows in murky water, moved in frantic, inefficient circles as she tried to scrub the pan. Her face was a mask of concentration and fear. She was trying so hard. Susan stood over her, a ceramic mug of coffee held in one perfectly manicured hand, the other resting on her hip. She was dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a fitted top, her hair already perfectly styled. She looked like she was supervising a paid servant, not a 6-year-old child. And Rick? My son was sitting at the large kitchen island, the one I'd paid a premium for because Susan had insisted she needed the space for entertaining. He was hidden behind the local paper, a second mug of coffee steaming beside him. He was 10 feet away. He could hear every word Susan said. He could see his daughter struggling on that step stool, and he was doing absolutely nothing. He was a silent, complicit partner in his daughter's abuse, finding refuge in the rustle of the sports section. I watched for another full minute, my fury solidifying into a block of ice in my chest. Susan critiqued Molly's every move. The water was too hot. She was using too much soap. She missed a spot. Each comment was a small, sharp pebble thrown at the little girl, who flinched with every impact but never spoke a word. Then I saw the lunch boxes, 2 of them, bright blue and emblazoned with superhero logos, sitting open on the counter. While Molly was still struggling with the breakfast dishes, she had evidently been tasked with packing her stepbrother's lunches as well. One was already filled a sandwich, a bag of chips, an apple. The other was half done. My gaze flickered back to Rick. He turned a page of the newspaper with a loud crinkle, utterly oblivious, or worse, utterly indifferent. He wasn't ignoring it. Ignoring it would imply he had to make an effort not to see. No, this was just his normal. This was the routine he had accepted, the one he participated in through his deliberate inaction. I had seen enough. The time for silent observation was over. The time for pretending, for choosing peace, for being the nice grandmother, was dead and buried. I had let this go on for far too long under my own roof. My roof. That single thought was a clarion call. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped out from behind the wall and into the kitchen. The suddenness of my appearance made all 3 of them jump. Molly gasped, her hands slipping on the greasy pan, sending a splash of dirty water onto the floor. Susan whirled around, her eyes wide with shock, the mask of civility momentarily gone, revealing the raw annoyance beneath. Rick lowered his newspaper, his expression a mixture of surprise and guilt. It was the guilt that told me everything. He knew this was wrong. He knew it, and he allowed it anyway. "Mom," he stammered, his face flushing. What are you doing here?" I didn't look at him. My eyes were locked on Molly, on her red, chapped hands, on the way she was trying to shrink into herself on that little step stool, as if hoping the floor would swallow her whole. I had come for confirmation. I had gotten it. Now, the war would begin. The silence in the kitchen was a thick, suffocating thing. It was broken only by the frantic drip, drip, drip of water from the pan Molly had dropped back into the sink. For a long moment, no one moved. They were frozen in their tableau of guilt, and I was the unwelcome spotlight illuminating their sordid little play. My presence was an indictment, and they knew it. Susan was the first to recover. The shock on her face was quickly papered over with a brittle, overly bright smile. It was a performer's reflex, an instinct to manage the narrative. "Julia, my goodness, you gave me a fright," she chirped, her voice a few notes too high. "You should have called. We would have had coffee ready for you." She gestured with her mug, as if to prove the point. A hostess caught off guard, but determined to maintain decorum. I ignored her pleasantries. My gaze was cold, and I let it travel deliberately around the room. I looked at the 2 superhero lunchboxes on the counter. I looked at the boys' dirty dishes piled in the sink. I looked at Rick, who was now folding his newspaper with meticulous, unnecessary precision, avoiding my eyes. Finally, I looked at Molly, who was still standing on that step stool, her small hands raw and red from the hot water. She looked like a tiny prisoner on the scaffold. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. It was a low, dangerous quiet that held more menace than any shout ever could. Why, I began, my eyes fixed on my son, is a 6-year-old girl washing a greasy frying pan at 7 o'clock in the morning? Rick flinched. He finally looked up, his expression shifting from guilt to a defensive scowl. It was his default setting, the one he used whenever he felt cornered. "Mom, don't start." "Oh, I'm not starting anything, Richard," I replied, the use of his full name a deliberate strike. "It appears you all have quite the system started here already, so I'll ask again. Why is she doing this?" I gestured to the sink. "Well, 2 healthy, older boys are, I assume, watching cartoons?" Susan stepped forward, placing herself between me and Rick, a human shield of practiced excuses. She placed a hand on Molly's shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look maternal, but came across as proprietary, like a warden steadying an inmate. Molly shrank under the touch. "Julia, you're misunderstanding," Susan said, her tone syrupy with condescension. "We believe in teaching all the children the importance of responsibility. It's a life skill. Molly is just doing her part for the family." The gaslighting was so blatant, so utterly shameless, that it took my breath away. "Her part?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "Her part is to be the scullery maid? To clean up after 2 boys who are years older and perfectly capable? What part are they playing in this family, Susan? What life skills are they learning? How to be useless?" A flash of anger crossed Susan's face. The mask had slipped again. "That's not fair. The boys have their own chores." "Do they?" I challenged, taking a step closer. "Do they scrub the bathrooms? Do they pack their own lunches? Or does Molly do that too?" The question hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the answer. Susan's lips thinned into a tight white line. Rick pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. He stood up, trying to use his height to reclaim some authority in the room he had already abdicated. "This is our house, Mom, and this is how we choose to raise our kids," he said, his voice rising. "It's about discipline, something she needs. She's quiet. She doesn't listen." The accusation was so absurd, it was almost laughable. Molly was the most obedient child I had ever known. She lived in a state of hypervigilance, desperate to please, terrified of doing the wrong thing. He wasn't disciplining her. He was punishing her for her very existence. He was punishing her for being Sarah's daughter. "She doesn't listen?" I shot back, my voice rising to match his. "Or is it that you don't speak to her, that you sit here, hiding behind your newspaper, while your wife berates her, while she tears down a grieving little girl by insulting her dead mother?" The color drained from Rick's face. He knew I'd heard. The accusation hit its mark, and for a moment he looked genuinely ashamed. But Susan was there to shore up his defenses. "That is an outrageous lie," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I would never." "I heard you, Susan," I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. "I heard every word, and the only thing that's outrageous here is your cruelty." We were at a standoff. The air crackled with unspoken truths. In that moment, I saw their partnership for what it was. He was weak, a man-child who craved a life free of responsibility. She was a predator who had recognized that weakness and exploited it, offering him an easy path in exchange for total control. She would manage the house, the finances, the children, and in return, he would look the other way. He would let her do whatever she wanted, as long as it didn't inconvenience him, and Molly was the price of his convenience. My eyes fell on the lunchboxes again. A new, terrible thought occurred to me. "Molly," I said, my voice softening for the first time. I looked directly at my granddaughter, trying to convey a universe of love and support in a single glance. "Honey, where is your lunch?" Molly looked from me to Susan, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't dare to speak. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Of course, the boys got carefully packed lunches. Molly got nothing. She was expected to prepare food for her tormentors, but not for herself. It was another small, calculated cruelty designed to remind her of her place. The dam of my composure broke. The cold, calculated anger gave way to a hot, protective fury. I turned my back on Rick and Susan and walked over to my purse, which I'd set on a chair by the door. I pulled out my wallet, my hands shaking with rage. I took out a $20 bill. I knelt down in front of Molly, ignoring the dirty water that had splashed on the floor. I took her small, chapped hand in mine. It was cold and damp. "Molly, honey," I whispered, pressing the bill into her palm and closing her fingers around it. "This is for you. You buy yourself the biggest, best lunch you can get at school today. Do you understand? Get some milk and a cookie, too." She stared at the bill, then up at me, her eyes filling with a confusion that was more heartbreaking than tears. It was as if a simple act of kindness was a language she no longer understood. Before she could respond, Rick was there. He moved with a speed I hadn't seen in him in years. He snatched the bill from Molly's hand. "We don't need your money, Mom," he said, his voice a low growl. "We cover her expenses." That was it. That was the final, unforgivable act. The combination of the theft, the lie, and the casual way he had dismissed my gesture of love for his daughter, it was the point of no return. I stood up slowly, my entire body humming with a strange, new clarity. The fog of my grief and guilt had burned away, leaving behind only the hard, gleaming edge of purpose. I looked at my son, really looked at him, not as the boy I had raised or the man I had hoped he would become, but as the stranger he was now, a weak, cruel man who would steal lunch money from his own daughter to maintain a pathetic illusion of control. "You cover her expenses?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "You think you cover anything in this house?" He stuffed the 20 into his pocket, a sneer on his face. "Yes, I do. I work hard to provide for this family in my house." I let him have the word. I let him stand there, puffed up with his false pride, basking in his role as the lord of a manor he didn't own. The confrontation was over. The argument was done. I wasn't going to win by shouting. I already knew how I was going to win. I had the key, not just to the front door, but to their entire, fraudulent life. And I was about to turn it. The air in the kitchen was thick with the aftermath of his pronouncement. My house. The words hung there, a monument to his delusion. Rick stood with his shoulders thrown back, the stolen $20 bill a bulge in his pocket, a trophy from a battle he thought he'd just won. He was waiting for me to argue, to raise my voice, to retreat in the face of his masculine authority. He was expecting the familiar pattern, a tense confrontation, followed by my grudging acceptance and a slow, simmering return to the status quo. He had no idea the world he was standing on was about to crumble into dust. Susan, emboldened by his stance, crossed her arms. Her expression was smug, triumphant. She had won. Her husband had sided with her against his own mother. The power structure in the house was secure. She shot me a look that was pure, venomous victory. I met her gaze and then Rick's, and for the first time, I didn't feel a flicker of the old familial obligation. The ties that had bound me to them, love, duty, a desperate hope for a happy family, had been severed. The man standing before me wasn't my son anymore, not in any way that mattered. He was a stranger who had my son's face, a man who would sanction the abuse of a child and then steal from her. And the woman beside him was his co-conspirator. I let the silence stretch, savoring the final few seconds of their ignorance. I watched the confidence settle on their faces, hardening like concrete. They believed they were untouchable in this pristine suburban castle. They had forgotten who held the deed. My voice, when I finally spoke, was devoid of heat. All the rage had cooled and compressed into something much harder, much more dangerous. Resolve. "Your house, Richard?" I asked, the question rhetorical, the calm in my tone more unsettling than any shout could have been. That's a very interesting way to put it. I walked over to the kitchen island, the one he had been hiding behind, and deliberately took the space he had just vacated. I placed my purse down on the cool granite with a soft, definitive thud. I was no longer a visitor. I was an occupying force. "Let's talk about this house," I said. my gaze sweeping across the expensive stainless steel appliances and the custom cabinetry, all the little upgrades Susan had insisted upon, all paid for with a mortgage I had secured. You seem to be under a serious misapprehension about the nature of your residency here. Rick's bluster began to falter. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. What are you talking about? I pay the bills. Do you? I replied, my voice still even, still quiet. You sign a check for the mortgage payment, yes. A check drawn from a joint account that I helped fund so you would be approved for the lease on your car. But paying the bill and owning the asset are two very different things. We both know the bank wouldn't have even looked at your application without me. Your credit was a joke. His face flushed a dark, angry red. It was the truth, and he knew it. I co-signed the mortgage, he sputtered, falling back on what he thought was an indisputable fact. My name is on the loan. Ah, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. And here we arrive at the heart of the matter. You see, I had a long talk with my lawyer before we went to the bank. A very long talk. He was quite insistent on a few things, given your financial history. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Susan's smug expression was beginning to dissolve, replaced by a look of wary uncertainty. She glanced at Rick as if seeking reassurance, but he had none to offer. He was starting to look like a man standing on a trap door, just now realizing he can't feel solid ground beneath his feet. I continued, my voice measured and clear, the voice of a CEO delivering a final, fatal performance review. Your name is on the paperwork. Yes, that's true, but not in the way you think. You're not a co-signer, Richard, not in the legal sense. You are listed as a co-occupant, a resident. It was a condition of the bank and a non-negotiable term from me that the mortgage note itself, the actual debt, the legal ownership, would be solely in my name. The deed to this property is mine. The loan is my liability. You merely have permission to live here. The bomb had been dropped. It didn't make a sound, but its shockwave ripped through the kitchen, shattering their comfortable reality. Stunned silence. Rick's jaw went slack. He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, the cogs in his brain whirring, trying to process a truth that was so fundamentally at odds with the world he had constructed for himself. He looked like he'd been slapped. Susan was the first to speak, her voice a strangled whisper. That can't be true. She looked frantically at Rick. Richard, is that true? But Rick was speechless. He was replaying the signing at the title company in his mind, remembering the mountain of paperwork he had initialed without reading, trusting me, trusting that his mother would never put him in a position of weakness. He had assumed. He had assumed his name on the documents meant partnership, ownership. He had never considered it could mean something else entirely. The confidence that had defined him just moments before didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping, the angry flush on his face replaced by a pasty, sickly white. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. He was no longer the master of his castle, he was a tenant, and I was the landlord. I looked over at Molly, who had been watching this entire exchange with a child's silent, uncomprehending gravity. She didn't understand the financial terminology, but she understood the shift in power. She saw the fear on her father's face, the panic in her stepmother's eyes. She saw me, her grandmother, standing tall and unshakable, and for the first time that morning, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in her eyes. It was a spark of hope. That single spark was all I needed. It was the fuel that burned away the last remnants of my hesitation, the last lingering whispers of a lifetime of enabling. I had spent years cleaning up his messes, cushioning his falls, paying for his mistakes. I had done it out of a misguided sense of maternal love, telling myself I was helping him. But I wasn't helping him. I was crippling him, and in the process, I had provided him with the resources to inflict his cruelty on his own child. My money, my signature, my house, my complicity, no more. I picked up my purse from the counter. My movements were calm, deliberate. Things are going to change, I announced to the silent, shattered room. Effective immediately. Rick finally found his voice, but it was thin and reedy, stripped of all its earlier aggression. Mom, you wouldn't. Wouldn't I? I looked him dead in the eye, and I let him see the person I had become in the last 24 hours. I was not the soft, forgiving mother he had always known how to manipulate. She was gone. In her place was a woman who had seen the truth and would burn the world down to protect a child. You threatened to starve a 6-year-old. You stole $20 from her hand. You stood by and did nothing while this woman insulted the memory of your dead wife. You have mistaken my love for weakness for the last time. Watch me. I turned and walked toward the hallway, toward Molly. I knelt down in front of her again on the cold, wet floor. I gently took the sponge from her hand and tossed it into the sink with a clatter. I looked into her wide, uncertain eyes. Molly, honey, I said, my voice soft but firm. Go upstairs and pack a bag, just your favorite clothes and your toothbrush. You're coming with me. She didn't question me. She didn't look to her father for permission. A single silent tear traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief. She nodded, turned, and ran from the room, her small feet pounding up the stairs. The sound was a drumbeat of liberation. I stood up and faced my son and his wife one last time. They were still standing there, shell-shocked, utterly defeated. The fight was gone. The smugness was gone. All that was left was the dawning, terrifying realization of what they had just lost. I was done. Done enabling, done pretending, done paying for this monstrous charade. The bank would hear from me before lunch. The eviction process would begin today. I hadn't just taken back control of a house. I had taken back control of my life, and I was about to save Molly's. The sound of Molly's small feet running up the stairs was the starting pistol for my new life. It was a sound of escape, of hope, and it echoed in the cavernous, silent kitchen where Rick and Susan stood like statues in a museum of their own making. Their faces were masks of pale, slack-jawed shock. The entire architecture of their world, the power, the control, the house itself had been demolished in the space of 5 minutes, and they were still standing amidst the rubble, unable to comprehend the totality of the devastation. I didn't give them time to recover. I didn't wait for the arguments, the pleading, or the inevitable rage. Their opinions were no longer relevant to me. I walked to the bottom of the staircase and waited, my back to them, presenting a wall of absolute finality. I could feel their eyes on me, could feel the frantic, useless churning of their minds. Let them churn. Their time was over. A minute later, Molly appeared at the top of the stairs. She was carrying a small pink backpack, the kind with a cartoon unicorn on it. It was probably the only thing in this entire house that was truly hers. Tucked under her other arm was a well-loved, slightly matted teddy bear with one button eye. She walked down the stairs slowly, one step at a time, her gaze fixed on me as if I were a lighthouse in a storm. She didn't look at her father or her stepmother. For her, they had already ceased to exist. When she reached the bottom, I took her free hand. Her small fingers curled around mine, a desperate, trusting grip that sent a jolt of pure, protective love through my veins. This was why I was doing this. This small hand in mine. Everything else was just noise. "Let's go, sweetheart," I said softly. I turned and walked us toward the front door. The same door I had slipped through less than an hour ago. A different woman entirely. I did not look back. I did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. We stepped out into the bright, cool morning air, and I pulled the door closed behind us. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging shut, with the monsters trapped inside and the victim walking free. The walk to my car was the longest block of my life. Every step was a conscious act of moving forward, of not looking back. I could feel the weight of the house behind us, the weight of the lives I had just shattered. But it was nothing compared to the weight that was being lifted from my shoulders, the weight of my own silence, my own complicity. I buckled a still silent Molly into the passenger seat. Her backpack sat on her lap, and she clutched the teddy bear to her chest like a shield. As I got into the driver's side and started the engine, I risked a single glance in the rearview mirror. The front door of the house remained closed. No one came running out. No one was shouting. There was only the perfect, placid facade of a suburban home, betraying none of the wreckage within. As I pulled away from the curb and drove down the quiet street, a profound sense of lightness filled me. I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my own family. I had effectively disowned my only son and made myself the enemy of his wife. I was walking away from the single largest financial investment of my life. And yet, I felt freer than I had in years. For my entire adult life, I had been a mother, a role defined by giving, fixing, and sacrificing. I had sacrificed my savings, my peace of mind, and my better judgment for a son who gave nothing back. Today, that sacrifice had ended. Today, I had chosen a different role, protector, and it fit me far better. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. I didn't know where we were going yet, only that we were moving away. Molly just watched the tidy houses of Cedar Grove slide by, her expression unreadable. I reached over and turned on the radio to a soft rock station, needing to fill the car with something other than the roaring of my own thoughts. I knew my next step had to be swift and decisive. The reveal in the kitchen was the opening salvo, but the war would be won with paperwork and phone calls. It had to be official, irreversible. I pulled into the half-empty parking lot of a small public library, a quiet, neutral space, and put the car in park. I turned to Molly.
"Sweetheart, Grandma has to make one very important phone call. It will only take a few minutes. Can you be brave for me for a little while longer?" She looked at me, her brown eyes impossibly deep and old for a 6-year-old, and she nodded. She didn't speak, but I knew she understood. She had been brave her whole life. I took a deep, steadying breath and pulled the most recent mortgage statement out of my glove compartment. I found the number for mortgage servicing and dialed, my finger firm and steady on the screen. The rage was gone, the grief was packed away. All that was left was the cold, efficient hum of purpose. After navigating a short, automated menu, a polite, professional voice came on the line. "Thank you for calling National Mortgage Services. My name is Brenda. How can I assist you today?" "Hello, Brenda," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's. "I am calling about loan number 74291. The property is in Cedar Grove, Ohio."
The name on the loan is Julia Harris. There was the sound of typing. "Okay, Mrs. Harris, I have your account pulled up. How can I help you?" I took one more look at Molly, at the teddy bear clutched in her arms, and the last flicker of doubt I might have had was extinguished. "Brenda," I said, "I am the sole signatory and legal owner of this property and this loan. I am calling to inform you that I will be ceasing all future payments, effective immediately." There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the deviation from her script. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. Are you experiencing financial hardship? We have several programs." "I am not experiencing financial hardship," I cut in, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I am making a deliberate financial decision. The occupants currently residing at the property have created an untenable and dangerous situation. I will no longer be financing it. I wish to begin the process for a deed in lieu of foreclosure or the most expedient foreclosure alternative available." More silence, followed by more frantic typing. This was clearly above her pay grade. "Ma'am, a deed in lieu or a foreclosure would have a significant negative impact on your credit rating. Are you aware of the consequences?" "I am perfectly aware of the consequences, Brenda," I said. "My financial reputation is a small price to pay to resolve this situation. Please tell me the next steps." She put me on hold. The instrumental hold music was cheerful and offensive. I looked at Molly. She was watching me, listening to every word, her head tilted. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," the smile said. "I've got this." When Brenda came back on the line, her voice was different. She had clearly been speaking to a supervisor. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for holding. Your request has been noted. The property will now officially enter into our loss mitigation department. A case manager will be assigned and will contact you within 2 business days. Once the process is formally initiated, a notice will be sent to the property. The occupants will be given a standard period, typically 30 days, to either vacate the premises or attempt to secure their own financing to refinance the loan. 30 days. A cold smile touched my lips. I knew Rick's financial situation better than anyone. He couldn't get a loan for a used car, let alone a $500,000 house. Refinancing was an impossibility. The clock was now ticking on their eviction. "Thank you, Brenda," I said. "That's all I needed to know." "Is there anything else I can assist you with today, Mrs. Harris?" she asked, the professional script returning now that the crisis was over. "No," I said. "That will be all." I ended the call and let the phone drop into my lap. I closed my eyes for a single long moment and let out a slow, shuddering breath. It was done. The plug had been pulled. The fuse had been lit. In a few days, a certified letter would arrive at the house I had just left, a formal declaration of war. They would have 30 days to pack up their life of entitled cruelty and get out. I opened my eyes and looked at my granddaughter. She was still watching me, waiting. The weight of what she had endured and the magnitude of what I had just done settled upon me. I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to face her, taking both of her small hands in mine. "Molly," I said, my voice thick with emotion for the first time that day, "you don't have to go back there, ever. You're going to stay with me now. You are safe. I promise you, sweetheart. No one is ever going to hurt you like that again." For the first time, her face crumpled. The brave little soldier disappeared, and a 6-year-old girl took her place. A single silent sob escaped her lips, and then she launched herself across the console and into my arms, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tightly, my own tears finally falling, hot and silent, into her soft brown hair. The war was far from over, I knew. There would be lawyers and agencies and ugly, angry phone calls. But we had just won the most important battle. We were out. We were free. My condo, which had felt like a lonely, echoing cavern the night before, was transformed the moment Molly and I walked through the door. It became a sanctuary. The quiet was no longer the sound of my own anxious thoughts, but the sound of peace, of safety. It was the sound of a little girl finally able to exhale. The first thing I did was run her a bath. I filled the deep soaking tub in my guest bathroom with warm water and a capful of lavender-scented bubbles, letting the fragrant steam fill the room. While she soaked, I went through the small unicorn backpack she'd packed. Inside, I found 2 mismatched pairs of socks, a worn-out t-shirt with a faded cartoon character on the front, a pair of leggings with a small hole in the knee, and her toothbrush. That was it. That was the sum total of the life she'd felt was worth saving. There were no toys, save for the one-eyed bear that now sat sentinel on the bathroom rug. There were no books. There were no treasured possessions. The stark emptiness of that bag was a more damning indictment than anything I had witnessed in Rick's kitchen. It was the luggage of a refugee, not a beloved child. A fresh wave of rage, cold and sharp, pierced through me. But I pushed it down. Rage was the fuel, but it couldn't be the engine. The engine had to be methodical, strategic, and relentless. Molly didn't need my anger right now. She needed my warmth. She needed my strength. When she got out of the bath, her skin pink and clean, I wrapped her in the fluffiest towel I owned. I had her put on a pair of my softest silk pajamas, which were ridiculously large on her, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times. But she smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time, as she swam in the luxurious fabric. We sat together on my plush living room couch, a world away from the stiff, unwelcoming sectional in her old house. I made her a cup of hot chocolate, piled high with whipped cream and marshmallows, and a plate of buttered toast cut into triangles. She ate with a slow, deliberate care, as if she were afraid the food might be taken away. As she ate, I spoke to her, my voice low and soothing. I didn't ask her about what had happened. I didn't press for details or ask her to recount her trauma. The time for that would come, with people better equipped than I to handle it. Instead, I promised her things. Simple, fundamental things that should have been her birthright. "This is your home now, Molly," I told her, tucking a soft cashmere throw blanket around her small shoulders. "You will have your own room. We will paint it any color you want. You will have your own bed with as many pillows as you can count. You will never, ever have to wash another dish unless you want to help me. You will never be hungry. You are safe here. I will keep you safe." She listened, her eyes wide over the rim of her mug. She didn't say much, but I could see the promises landing, sinking in, planting seeds of security in the barren soil of her little heart. For the first time, I saw the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. I saw the hypervigilance in her eyes soften just a fraction. This was the first step, building a foundation of safety. The next step was building a fortress around it. As soon as Molly was settled in the guest room, tucked into a bed piled high with pillows and her teddy bear beside her, I went into my home office and closed the door. The time for comfort was over. The time for war had resumed. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Rick and Susan would not go quietly. They would fight, and they would fight dirty. They would use accusations, lies, and emotional manipulation. I needed a professional. I needed a warrior. I knew exactly who to call. Ismael Vega was a legend in Columbus legal circles. He was a veteran family law attorney, a man known for his calm demeanor, his razor-sharp intellect, and his absolute refusal to be intimidated. He had handled a colleague's messy divorce years ago, and I had never forgotten her description of him. He's the person you call when you need to burn the whole thing down and walk away with the ashes. That was exactly what I needed. His office patched me through to his cell phone. When he answered, his voice was calm and measured. "Ismael Vega." "Mr. Vega," I said, "my name is Julia Harris. You don't know me, but I need your help. It's a family matter. It involves my 6-year-old granddaughter." I spent the next 20 minutes laying it all out. I told him everything, my voice a low, steady monotone as I recounted the events of the past 2 days. I told him about the bathroom threat, the dishwashing, the cruel jab about Sarah, the stolen lunch money. I told him about the mortgage, my ownership of the house, and the call I had just made to the bank. I didn't editorialize. I didn't cry. I presented the facts, cold and hard, like pieces of evidence being laid out on a table. As I spoke, I heard a sound that surprised me. It was a soft, almost imperceptible clicking. It took me a moment to realize what it was. He was recording me. Not with a device, but with his mind, or perhaps just a pen on a legal pad. It was the sound of a professional building a case. "Mrs. Harris," he began, "did you happen to record any of this? The threat about the bathroom, for instance?" "My God, no," I said, a little flustered. I was in shock, and I didn't even think... "It's all right, Julia," he said, his voice instantly reassuring, shifting from the formal "Mrs. Harris" to a more personal tone. It was a subtle signal. "I'm on your side now. Your testimony as a direct witness is powerful, but from now on, I want you to be prepared. If you have to interact with your son or his wife again, I want you to have your phone's audio recorder running. Ohio is a one-party consent state. As long as you are part of the conversation, you can legally record it. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said, a shiver running down my spine. This was real. "Good," he continued, his voice all business again. "Here is what we are going to do. First, we need to document everything. Tomorrow morning, I want you to take Molly to her pediatrician. Do not tell the doctor you are building a legal case. Simply say you have some concerns and you want a general checkup. Have the doctor look at her hands. You describe them as chapped and red. Let the doctor note that in her file. Have them make a note of her general demeanor if she seems anxious, withdrawn, anything. We need a third-party professional record of her physical and emotional state immediately after being removed from that home." "Okay," I said, scribbling notes on a pad. "Second, I want you to think about the neighbors. Is there anyone on that street who you trust? Anyone who might have seen or heard anything over the years? An image of a kind-faced, older woman popped into my mind. Mrs. Brown, I said. Celeste Brown. She lives next door. She sent me a Christmas card last year. Perfect. We'll get a private investigator to speak with her. We won't approach her directly just yet. We need to be careful. Third, based on what you've told me, we have more than enough to file for an emergency protective order and temporary custody. The verbal abuse, the forced labor, the deprivation of food that is a clear and present danger to the child. We will file first thing tomorrow morning. This will legally prevent Rick and Susan from having any contact with Molly or with you. A wave of relief washed over me. A legal wall. Thank you, I whispered. We're not done, he said, his voice firm. This will likely trigger an immediate response from them and an investigation by Child Protective Services. This is a good thing, Julia. Do not be afraid of it. CPS can be a powerful ally. We will cooperate with them fully. We will also petition the court for a full psychological evaluation of Molly. We need a professional to assess the extent of the emotional damage. And frankly, we may petition for an evaluation of your son and his wife as well. The scope of it, the sheer methodical aggression of the plan, was breathtaking. He wasn't just building a defense, he was launching a preemptive, multi-front assault. Mr. Vega, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. You just have to be strong for your granddaughter. I'll handle the rest. I'm sending you some paperwork via email now. Fill it out tonight. My office will file everything as soon as the courthouse opens. Now, go and be with Molly. Let her see that you are calm and in control. She will take her cues from you. We hung up, and I sat there in the quiet of my office, the plan swirling in my mind. For the first time, I felt like I had an army at my back. Ismael Vega was my general, and he had just handed me a battle plan. I looked down at my own hands. They were trembling slightly, not with fear, but with adrenaline. Rick and Susan thought this was a family squabble. They thought this was about a house. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had awakened a part of me I didn't even know existed. They had hurt a child I loved more than life itself. And they were about to find out what a grandmother's love, backed by a good lawyer, could really do. The rest of the day passed in a surreal bubble of calm. Following Ismael Vega's advice, I projected an aura of absolute serenity for Molly's sake. We ordered pizza, her choice, pepperoni and extra cheese, and ate it sitting on the floor in my living room, watching a classic animated movie. I watched as she laughed, a real uninhibited child's laugh, at a cartoon cat chasing a mouse. The sound was so precious, so rare, it felt like a physical treasure in the room. For a few hours, we were just a grandmother and her granddaughter, existing in a world where monsters didn't wear the faces of your own family. But beneath the surface of my calm, a current of anticipation hummed. I knew the peace was temporary. It was the quiet before the storm. I filled out the paperwork Vega had sent, my hand steady as I detailed the facts of my son's income, his history of financial instability, and the timeline of events. With every box I checked and every line I signed, I was forging another link in the chain that would bind them. The call I had been waiting for, the one I had been dreading, came just after 9 o'clock. Molly was asleep, tucked into the guest bed, the one-eyed teddy bear standing guard on the nightstand. I had just finished cleaning up our pizza dinner when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen read, Rick. My heart gave a single hard thud against my ribs. I took a breath, remembering Vega's instructions. I swiped to answer, and before I put the phone to my ear, I tapped the screen to begin recording the audio. Hello, Richard, I said, my voice even. Don't you hello, Richard me, he snarled. The sound was distorted, thick with a rage that had clearly been simmering all day. What the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just take my daughter. Your daughter? I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. It's interesting that you're remembering she's your daughter now. You seem to have forgotten this morning when you stole her lunch money. I didn't steal anything, he yelled, and I could hear Susan's voice in the background, feeding him lines, stoking the fire. We are her parents. We make the financial decisions. You have no right to interfere. You bring Molly home, right now." "That will not be happening," I stated, my voice like ice. "Molly is safe. She is staying with me." "You can't do this. I'll call the police. I'll report you for kidnapping," he threatened. "You do that, Richard," I said, the calmness in my voice a stark contrast to his hysteria. "I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear your side of the story. I know I'll be interested to share mine. I wonder what they'll think about a father who threatens to withhold food from his 6-year-old as punishment for not cleaning a bathroom to his satisfaction." There was a sudden silence on the other end of the line. The word police was a weapon he thought was his to wield, and I had just turned it back on him. I had called his bluff. I could hear him breathing heavily, the gears of his mind grinding, trying to find a new angle of attack. Susan snatched the phone from him. "You manipulative old bitch," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You have wanted to turn him against me since day one. This isn't about Molly. This is about you not being able to control him anymore. You are going to regret this. We are coming over. You will give us our daughter." The line went dead. My blood ran cold. We are coming over. The threat was real. My condo building had security, but they were no match for a determined, enraged couple who knew my name and apartment number. I immediately dialed Ismail Vega. He answered on the second ring. "Julia, what's wrong?" "They're coming here," I said, my voice tight, the practiced calm finally starting to fray. "Rick and Susan, they just threatened me and said they're on their way to get Molly." "Okay," Vega said, his voice a steady grounding force. "Listen to me carefully. Do not let them in. Do not engage with them through the door. Is there a security desk in your lobby?" "Yes." "Call them right now. Tell them your estranged son and his wife are on their way, that they are not to be allowed upstairs, and that if they refuse to leave, security should call the police immediately. I am on my way. I'm 20 minutes out." "You're coming here?" I asked, a wave of profound relief washing over me. "They've just made their first mistake, Julia," he said, and I could hear the sound of his car starting in the background. "They're about to provide us with a hostile, third-party witness. Me. Now make the call to security. I'll see you soon." I did as he said, my fingers fumbling slightly on the keypad as I called the front desk. I explained the situation to the night shift security guard, a large, stoic man named Frank, who assured me he would handle it. 15 minutes later, my apartment's intercom buzzed. It was Frank from the lobby. "Mrs. Harris? Richard and Susan Harris are here. They're very insistent on seeing you." "Do not let them up, Frank," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Please, call the police if you have to." "Already on it, ma'am," he said. But it was too late. Before Frank could stop them, Rick and Susan had likely seen another resident entering the elevator and slipped in behind them, a common tactic in secure buildings. Less than a minute later, a furious pounding began on my apartment door. Boom, boom, boom. "Mom, open this door! Open this damn door right now!" Rick's voice was a muffled roar through the thick wood. I stood in the center of my living room, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear Molly stirring in the guest room, a small, frightened whimper. The sound galvanized me. I walked over to the guest room, opened the door, and saw her sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, rushing to her side and gathering her into my arms. "They can't get in. I won't let them." The pounding continued, louder now, more frantic. Susan was screaming, her voice a shrill, piercing shriek. "Give me my daughter, you crazy old woman! You have no right!" My phone was still in my hand, the audio recorder still running. I just held Molly, my body shielding hers, whispering reassurances I didn't entirely feel myself. And then I had an idea. It was a gamble. A risky move, but my gut screamed at me to do it. With Molly still wrapped in my arms, I walked toward the front door. I didn't open it. I held my phone up close to the wood and I hit play on the recording I'd made earlier that day. "Clean the bathroom or you get no dinner." Rick's own voice, cold and hard, echoed through the door. Outside in the hallway, the pounding stopped. There was a sudden, shocked silence. I had just played my trump card, and they had never even known I was holding it. What was that?" Susan stammered, her voice audible through the door. "I have it all, Richard," I called out, my voice strong and clear. "Every threat, every lie, and now the police are on their way to listen to it too." That's when the pleading started. Rick's tone changed instantly from rage to panic. "Mom, no, please, don't. Let's just talk about this. Open the door. We can be reasonable." But as he spoke, I heard the ding of the elevator down the hall, followed by firm, approaching footsteps. "Too late," I whispered to myself. I heard a new voice in the hallway, a calm, authoritative voice that cut through the tension like a knife. "Richard Harris?" It was Ismael Vega. "I am Ismael Vega, Mrs. Harris's attorney," he announced. "I would strongly advise you and your wife to lower your voices and step away from the door. You are currently engaged in harassing a private citizen, and I can assure you the police, who are on their way, will take a very dim view of this." Susan, clearly not understanding the gravity of the situation, lost what little composure she had left. "You can't keep us from our daughter," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "This is a family matter. It has nothing to do with you." "Ma'am," Vega replied, his voice still unnervingly calm, "the moment you started making threats and attempting to force your way into a private residence, it became a legal matter. Your client, Mrs. Harris, has a recording of your husband threatening to deprive his child of food. You are creating a public disturbance. You are compounding your legal exposure with every word you speak. Even your husband seems to understand that." I peeked through the peephole. I could see Ismael Vega, impeccably dressed in a suit, standing calmly between Rick and Susan and my door. And he was right. Susan was red-faced and screaming. But Rick looked horrified. The reality of his situation had finally, brutally crashed down upon him. He was looking at his wife, at the scene they were causing, at the calm, immovable lawyer, and for the first time, he seemed to see the abyss he was standing on the edge of. He looked utterly and completely terrified. The showdown was over. Vega had arrived, a calm third-party witness to their unhinged aggression. They had taken the bait, and the trap had been sprung. I held Molly tighter, my own fear finally receding, replaced by the cold, certain knowledge that we had just won. They had brought the war to my doorstep, and in doing so, had handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The arrival of the police was almost an anticlimax. By the time their firm, official footsteps echoed down the hallway, Ismael Vega had the situation completely under control. Rick, looking pale and shaken, had managed to pull a still hysterical Susan back towards the elevators. He seemed to have finally understood the catastrophic nature of their miscalculation. Yelling at me in the privacy of his own home was one thing. Creating a public spectacle witnessed by my attorney was a legal disaster of another magnitude entirely. I opened the door only after Vega gave a quiet, prearranged knock. He stepped inside while two uniformed officers calmly but firmly escorted Rick and Susan downstairs. One of the officers took my statement, my voice steady as I recounted the phone call and the subsequent attempt to force their way in. Vega stood beside me, a silent, reassuring presence, occasionally clarifying a legal point for the officer. He handed over a copy of the audio I had recorded, both of Rick's initial threat and the entire unhinged exchange in the hallway. The officer listened to a portion of it, his expression hardening. They were issued a formal warning for trespassing and disturbing the peace, a mere slap on the wrist, but Vega assured me that wasn't the point. "The point is, the police report," he explained, after the officers had left, and a profound, welcome silence had settled over my apartment. "We now have an official, third-party document detailing their aggressive, unstable behavior. It's another brick in the wall we're building around Molly. They came here tonight to intimidate you. Instead, they handed us a gift." He was right. Their desperate, angry gambit had backfired spectacularly. They had intended to terrify me into submission, to remind me of my place as the aging, inconsequential matriarch. Instead, they had proven my case for me. They had demonstrated, in front of witnesses, exactly why they were unfit to be near a vulnerable child. The immediate consequences of that night began to ripple outward the very next day. The certified letter from the mortgage company arrived at the Cedar Grove house. I could only imagine the scene. Susan, likely still furious from the previous night's humiliation, seeing the official envelope, the cold, legalistic language detailing the initiation of foreclosure proceedings, the stark 30-day deadline to vacate. The foundation of her carefully constructed suburban empire had just been formally condemned. I didn't have to imagine her fury for long. My phone, which I had resolved not to answer, lit up with a string of vicious, rambling text messages from a number I didn't recognize but knew had to be Susan's. They were a torrent of blame, threats, and self-pity. "You think you've won, but you've ruined everything. This is your fault. Rick is a mess because of you. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding. Molly is fine. She's always been a difficult, moody child. You will pay for this. I will tell everyone what a manipulative monster you are. I will make sure you never see any of us again." The messages were a window into her unraveling mind. There was no apology, no flicker of self-awareness. In her narrative, she was the victim, I was the villain, and Molly was a mere pawn, a difficult object at the center of our conflict. I saved every single message, took screenshots, and forwarded them all to Ismael Vega with a simple note: "More bricks for the wall." His reply was immediate: "Keep them coming." But the most significant echo from that night came not from a text message, but from a phone call from a number I almost didn't answer. The caller ID read Celeste Brown. The neighbor. My heart skipped a beat. Vega's investigator hadn't even had a chance to contact her yet. "Julia? It's Celeste Brown, from next door to Richard," she said, her voice a little hesitant. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Celeste," I said, my mind racing. "It's lovely to hear from you. Is everything all right?" There was a pause, and then she let out a long, weary sigh. "Well, that's just it, dear. I don't think it has been all right for a very long time. I'm calling because, well, I saw the police report from your building in the public blotter online. I saw your name and Richard's, and I felt I had to call. I've been worried for months, and I've been a coward. I haven't said anything." My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. "Worried about what, Celeste?" Her voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with a mixture of guilt and conviction. "About that little girl, Julia. About Molly. The walls in these new houses, they're paper thin, you know. I hear things. Not all the time, but often enough. I hear that woman, Susan. I hear her shouting." "What does she shout?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Horrible things," Celeste said, her voice trembling slightly. "Things you should never say to a child. You're useless. Why can't you do anything right? You're just like your mother. That last one? She says that one a lot. And I hear Molly crying, softly, you know, like she's trying not to be heard. It just breaks my heart. I've wanted to call someone, but you always think, you don't want to interfere. You don't want to cause trouble. But when I saw that police report, I thought, trouble has already found them. And maybe it's time I stopped being a silent bystander." Her words were a validation, a confirmation from outside my own pained observations. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. The abuse was real, and it was audible through the walls. "Celeste," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you. Thank you for telling me this. You have no idea how much this means. Would you be willing to give a formal statement to my attorney?" I asked, holding my breath. "I'll do better than that," she said, her voice firming with resolve. "I'll testify in court if I have to. What's happening over there isn't discipline, it's cruelty, and it's high time someone put a stop to it." We talked for another 10 minutes, and she recounted other small, heartbreaking observations. Molly always being the one to drag the heavy trash cans to the curb. Molly always being the one outside weeding the flower beds, while the two boys splashed in their inflatable pool in the backyard. Small details that, when woven together, created an undeniable tapestry of neglect and abuse. While these battles were being fought on legal and community fronts, the most important transformation was happening quietly within the four walls of my condo. Molly was beginning to decompress. The change was not dramatic or sudden, but a slow, gentle unfurling, like a flower that has been starved of sunlight finally being brought into the warmth. The first night, she had woken up twice with small, whimpering cries. I had rushed to her side, holding her until the quiet terror subsided and she drifted back to sleep. But on the second night, she slept through until morning, and then the third. The deep, exhausted circles under her eyes began to fade. She started to talk more. At first, her sentences were short and hesitant, always phrased like questions, as if seeking permission to speak. But slowly, she grew more confident. She told me about her favorite color, purple, her favorite animal, a sloth, and the name of her one-eyed bear, Captain Buttons. These were small, precious revelations, fragments of a personality that had been buried under years of fear. One afternoon, I found her sitting at my kitchen table, a box of crayons I had bought her spread out before her. She was coloring, her tongue stuck out in concentration, filling a page with a riot of bright, cheerful colors. There was a purple sun, a green sky, and a little girl with a huge smile holding hands with a woman who had a halo of white hair. She was drawing a picture of us. There were no stepbrothers in the picture. There was no father. There was no house in Cedar Grove. There was just her and me and a world of impossible, wonderful colors. Later that day, we were watching cartoons again, curled up on the couch under the cashmere blanket. It was the same loud, silly show the boys had been watching at the other house. But here, in the safety of my arms, she wasn't retreating from the noise. She was giggling. She pointed at the screen as the cartoon coyote was once again foiled by the roadrunner, and a peal of pure, joyful laughter filled the room. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I held her close, breathing in the clean, sweet scent of her hair, and I felt my own weary heart begin to heal. The anger and the grief were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they were no longer the only things I felt. Now, there was also a fierce, soaring hope. Rick and Susan had tried to extinguish the light in this child, but they had failed. The spark was still there, and I would spend the rest of my days fanning it into a brilliant, beautiful flame. The house in Cedar Grove was built on a foundation of my money. The new life we were building here, in this quiet condo, would be built on a foundation of something much stronger: love. And that was a foundation they could never foreclose on. The fragile peace we had cultivated in my condo was shattered on a Tuesday morning. The wall we were building around Molly, so carefully constructed by Ismael Vega with bricks of legal paperwork and witness statements, was about to be tested by a force I had never anticipated: the court of public opinion. It began, as so many modern disasters do, on social media. My phone started buzzing with notifications from a messaging app, a group chat with a few old friends from my book club. "Julia, have you seen this?" one message read. "Oh my God, is this Rick?" said another. Attached was a link. My hand trembled as I tapped on it, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The link took me to a Facebook video. The thumbnail was a close-up of a man's face, haggard and poorly lit. It was Rick. I plugged in my headphones, not wanting the sound to disturb Molly, who was happily building a tower of blocks in the living room. I pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a smartphone held by an unsteady hand. Rick was sitting in what looked like his car, parked on the side of a nondescript road at dusk. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken, his face pale and unshaven. He stared at the camera for a long, uncomfortable moment before he spoke, his voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the defensive bluster I knew so well. It was something else. Something broken. "My name is Richard Harris," he began, his voice raspy, "and I have been a terrible father." He took a ragged breath, and the confession poured out of him in a raw, unfiltered torrent. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to soften the truth. He laid it all bare, the ugly, shameful reality of his life for the past 3 years. "I let my daughter, my little 6-year-old girl Molly, I let her be treated like a servant in my own home," he said, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was visceral, almost tangible. I let her be bullied by her stepmother and her stepbrothers. I let her go hungry. I stood by and did nothing while her spirit was crushed. I did nothing because I was a coward. I was weak. I wanted an easy life, and I let my wife Susan run everything, and I didn't care who got hurt, as long as it wasn't me. He talked about the foreclosure notice. He talked about the police showing up at my condo. He talked about hearing his own voice on the recording, threatening his own child. It was like hearing a monster, he whispered, his eyes welling up with tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. I didn't even recognize the person I'd become, a man who would steal lunch money from his own kid. What kind of man does that? Then he looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing, and he spoke to me. Mom, my mom, Julia. She tried to warn me. She saw what was happening and I didn't listen. And when she finally stepped in, when she finally did what I was too weak to do, I fought her. I screamed at her. I hated her for it, because she was holding up a mirror and I couldn't stand to see the reflection. He took another shuddering breath. She saved my daughter. My mother saved my daughter from me, from the life I had allowed for her. She took Molly, and she's keeping her safe, and it is the best thing that has ever happened to that little girl. I'm posting this because the truth has to come out. People need to know. Susan will try to spin this, to lie. But this is the truth. I failed. I failed as a man, and I failed as a father. And Molly, sweetie, if you ever see this, I am so sorry. I love you, and I'm glad you're with Grandma. The video ended abruptly. He just reached out, and the screen went black. I sat there, frozen, the headphones still pressed to my ears. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt a complex, warring storm of emotions. There was a grim satisfaction in hearing him finally admit the truth. There was a profound, aching pity for the broken man in the video. And beneath it all, there was a deep, primal stab of a mother's pain for her child's suffering, even a child who was 40 years old and had caused so much harm. He was my son, and he was in agony. But it was an agony of his own making. I didn't have time to process it. The video, I soon discovered, had not just been posted to his personal Facebook page. It had been posted on TikTok as well, and it was going viral. By noon, it had 100,000 views. By 3 o'clock, it had 1 million. News outlets, local first and then national, began to pick it up. They embedded the video in online articles with sensational clickable headlines. I was a monster. Ohio dad's tearful confession of daughter's abuse goes viral. My name and Molly's were initially kept out of it, but the internet is a ravenous detective. People started digging. They found Rick's old family photos, pictures of him and Susan and the boys, and of him and Molly. They found my Facebook profile. The story began to piece itself together in the public sphere. The reaction was overwhelming and instantaneous. There was a tidal wave of sympathy for Molly and for me. I was hailed as a hero, a lioness grandmother who had stepped in to save her grandcub. Rick, surprisingly, received a mixture of condemnation and praise scorn for his weakness, but a grudging respect for his raw public act of contrition. The full force of the internet's collective rage, however, was directed squarely at one person, Susan. She became a digital villain overnight. Her photo was everywhere. She was branded a wicked stepmother, a monster, a parasite. People left furious, vitriolic comments on every social media post she had ever made. Her life, as she knew it, was being publicly dismantled, comment by comment, share by share. Ismael Vega called me late that afternoon. "I've seen it," he said, his voice grim. "The confession." "What does this mean for us?" I asked, my voice trembling. "In the long run, it's a gift," he said. "It's an uncoerced public admission of guilt. It makes our legal case for custody nearly airtight. He's corroborated every single one of our claims, but in the short run, it's a nightmare." He was right. The viral spotlight was a dangerous, unpredictable thing. Our privacy was gone. Local news vans started showing up outside my condo building, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky.
I received friend requests and messages from hundreds of strangers, some offering support, others offering unsolicited advice, and a few that were just creepy. "This brings a new level of risk," Vega continued. "The public nature of this could make Susan even more desperate and unpredictable. And there's a real concern for your safety, and for Molly's. We are no longer operating in the quiet confines of the family court system.
This is a public spectacle. I need you to pack a bag for yourself and for Molly. I've booked you a suite at a hotel downtown under a different name. The manager is a friend of mine. You'll have complete privacy and security. You need to disappear for a while until this first wave of media frenzy dies down." The idea of being driven from my own home filled me with a fresh wave of anger, but I knew he was right. I looked over at Molly. She was oblivious, humming to herself as she organized her crayons by color. She had been through so much. The last thing she needed was to be confronted by a reporter's camera or to see her own face on the evening news. So, I packed. Just as Molly had done a few days earlier, I packed a small bag with only the essentials. We slipped out of the building through a back service entrance, Vega's car waiting for us in the alley. As we drove away, I could see the news van still camped out front, vultures waiting for a story. We checked into the hotel, a quiet, elegant place in the heart of the city. Our suite was spacious and anonymous, with a beautiful view of a city that suddenly felt hostile and strange. That night, after Molly was asleep in the plush king-sized bed in the other room, I stood by the window, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the streets below. Rick's confession had changed everything. It had taken our private, painful family drama and turned it into a piece of public entertainment, a viral story for strangers to consume and comment on. It had given us a powerful weapon for our legal battle, but it had come at a steep price. We were no longer just a family in crisis. We were a headline. And I had a terrible feeling that Susan, cornered and publicly shamed, was not going to accept this verdict without a fight. The war had just escalated beyond the courtroom and onto a national stage, and her counteroffensive, I suspected, was coming soon. For 2 days, the hotel suite was a silent, air-conditioned bunker against the firestorm raging outside. I kept the television off, the curtains drawn, and my phone on silent. Ismael Vega had been right. Rick's confession had handed us the legal equivalent of a royal flush, but the cost was our anonymity. We were now characters in a national drama, our faces and names splashed across news websites and daytime talk shows. I focused on Molly, creating a bubble of normalcy for her with room service pancakes, coloring books, and endless rounds of Go Fish. She was happy, blissfully unaware of the viral tempest that had her at its center. I knew the silence wouldn't last. A woman like Susan, narcissistic, image-obsessed, and now publicly humiliated on a scale she could never have imagined, would not simply crawl away and disappear. She would not accept the role of the villain. She would fight back. Her entire identity was built on a carefully constructed facade of suburban perfection. Rick's confession hadn't just exposed her cruelty, it had demolished her life's work. A counterattack wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. It arrived on the 3rd day. Vega called me, his voice tight with a frustration I had never heard from him before. "Turn on Channel 6, Julia, you need to see this." My hand trembled as I found the remote, my heart hammered against my ribs. I switched on the television to a local midday news program. And there she was, Susan. She was not the hysterical, shrieking woman from my hallway. This was a new Susan, a carefully packaged and media-trained version. She was seated in a plush armchair opposite a sympathetic-looking female news anchor. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore a soft, lavender-colored sweater, a color chosen, no doubt, to convey gentleness and femininity. Her face was a mask of sorrowful dignity, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She looked like a victim, a grieving wife and mother caught in a tragic misunderstanding. "Susan," the anchor began, her voice dripping with compassion, "your husband's video has been seen by millions. In it, he makes some very serious, very painful allegations. Tell me your side of the story." Susan took a delicate, shuddering breath. When she spoke, her voice was soft, fragile, and laced with pain. "It's been a nightmare, Diane. she whispered, as if the words themselves were a physical effort. An absolute nightmare. My husband, Richard, is not a well man. He's been under an immense amount of stress. He's impressionable, and he has been manipulated. My blood ran cold. Manipulated. Manipulated by whom? The anchor prompted. Susan looked directly into the camera, her eyes finding mine through the screen. She didn't have to say my name. Richard's mother, Julia, has never approved of our marriage, she said, her voice catching with faux emotion. She has always been controlling, especially with our finances. When she helped us with the house, it wasn't a gift. It was leverage. She used it to try to run our lives. And when I finally stood up to her, when I tried to set healthy boundaries for my family, she retaliated. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was twisting reality, recasting my protection of Molly as a vindictive power play. She took our daughter, Molly, from our home under false pretenses, Susan continued, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. She has been feeding Richard lies, poisoning him against me. And that video, that horrible video, it was coerced. He was broken, confused, and she took advantage of that. She then moved on to the recording of Rick's threat, the cornerstone of my case. As for the audio she's been sharing, it was taken completely out of context. We were having a difficult parenting moment, something every family goes through. Julia, she manipulated that audio. She edited it to make it sound like something it wasn't. She's been coaching poor Molly for weeks, filling her head with stories, turning her against her own father and me. All I have ever wanted is what's best for all of my children, Molly included. I felt physically ill. I was watching my life, my actions, being expertly rewritten into a villain's narrative. She was using the classic abuser's playbook: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. In Susan's telling, I was the manipulative monster, and she was the devoted mother trying to protect her family from a meddling, vindictive mother-in-law. The anchor, completely captivated, nodded along. So you're saying none of this was true? The chores, the withholding of food? Of course not, Susan said, a look of pained sincerity on her face. We believe in responsibility. All our children have chores. We were teaching Molly life skills. Julia has twisted normal family discipline into something ugly and sinister. She has kidnapped my stepdaughter, and she is trying to destroy my family, and I won't let her. The interview ended with a close-up on Susan's tear-streaked, determined face. The narrative had been wobbled. Rick's raw, messy confession was now pitted against Susan's polished, sympathetic performance. To the casual viewer, it was no longer a clear case of abuse. It was a he said, she said, family drama. Clickbait headlines began to spread instantly. Wicked stepmother or maligned wife, Susan Harris fights back against viral video. She's good, Vega said grimly over the phone after I'd switched off the TV. She's hired a PR firm and a new lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne. He's known for this kind of aggressive, media-driven defense. They're not trying to win in the court of law. They're trying to win in the court of public opinion, to muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. What do we do? I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. We do nothing, he said, his voice a steady anchor. We do not engage with the media. We do not sink to her level. We stick to the facts, and we let the legal process work. Her performance was compelling, but it was built on a foundation of lies. And lies, Julia, eventually collapse under the weight of hard evidence. But Susan and her new lawyer weren't just fighting in the media, they were fighting in the courts. The very next day, Vega received a motion they had filed, an emergency hearing to contest our protective order, and they were pushing for a very specific, very insidious request. They wanted the court to appoint an independent child psychologist to evaluate Molly not for trauma, but to test for parental alienation and suggestibility. The legal move was brilliant in its cruelty. They were formally accusing me of brainwashing Molly. They were attempting to reframe her fear and trauma as a script I had fed her. If the psychologist found any evidence that Molly's testimony had been influenced by me, which was a real risk, given how much she trusted and relied on me, our entire case could be jeopardized. The media narrative, already wobbling, now had a new, tantalizing angle. Grandmother accused of coaching abused child. The tide of public sympathy, which had been so overwhelmingly in our favor, began to show signs of turning. Doubt, once planted, was a weed that grew with terrifying speed. I felt a creeping sense of despair. Susan's counteroffensive was working. She was using the power of television and the complexities of the legal system to sow confusion. Rick's raw confession was starting to seem to some like the ramblings of an unstable man. My actions were being painted as the machinations of a bitter, controlling old woman. I sat in the sterile silence of the hotel room, the city lights beginning to glitter outside the window. I had done everything right. I had spoken the truth. I had protected a child. And yet, I was losing. Susan, with her lavender sweater, her perfect tears, and her high-priced lawyer, was winning. She was proving that a well-told lie could be more powerful than the ugly, unvarnished truth. I looked into the other room, where Molly was sleeping peacefully. Her small face relaxed in a way it never had been in her old life. She was safe for now. But for how much longer? Susan wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting to get Molly back. Not because she loved her, but because Molly was a symbol of her defeat. And Susan was a woman who would never, ever admit defeat. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, that she would stop at nothing to win. The thought of Molly being returned to that house, to that woman, it was a possibility I could not bear to contemplate. The fortress I thought we had built was under siege, and for the first time I was terrified that its walls might not be strong enough to hold. The days leading up to the emergency hearing were the longest of my life. Susan's polished television performance had done its damage. The public narrative, once a clear river of sympathy, was now a murky swamp of doubt and speculation. I followed Ismael Vega's advice and remained silent, but the silence was a physical torment. Every clickbait headline, every skeptical comment on a news article felt like a personal blow. I was a grandmother who had saved her grandchild from a life of misery, and I was being recast as a manipulative puppet master. The injustice of it was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. Vega, however, was a rock of calm in the swirling storm. "Let her talk, Julia," he told me during one of our daily calls. "Let her lawyer grandstand. They are playing a short game for the cameras. We are playing the long game for the judge. Evidence is all that matters, and we have it." I wanted to believe him, but fear was a cold, constant companion. The motion for a psychological evaluation of Molly to test for suggestibility terrified me. Molly was 6. She was traumatized, and she loved me. Of course she was suggestible. What child wasn't? Susan's legal team was setting a trap, and I could see no way to avoid walking right into it. The evening before the hearing, as I was mechanically going through the motions of making dinner for Molly in our hotel suite's small kitchenette, my phone rang with an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, assuming it was another reporter who had managed to get my number. But something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice wary. "Is this Julia Harris?" a woman's voice asked. It was soft, with a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. "Who is this?" I asked. "My name is Martha Nguyen," the woman said. I live across the street from your son in Cedar Grove. I think I have something that might help you." My heart stopped. I gripped the phone tighter. "Help me how, Martha?" "My husband installed a Ring camera last year," she explained, her voice gaining a bit of confidence. "It points at our front yard, but it captures the street and a clear view of the front of Richard's house and most of his yard. I've been watching the news. I saw that woman, Susan, on the television with her lies. It made me so angry. My husband and we've always thought something was off, the way she treated that little girl." I held my breath, not daring to speak, not wanting to interrupt. "So, I went back through the footage," Martha continued. "Months of it. And I found things.
I downloaded the clips. I have them." "What things?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "What did you find?"
"Things she can't deny," Martha said, a note of quiet triumph in her voice. "Clear as day video clips. From last summer, there's one of Molly, all by herself, dragging that big, heavy garden hose all the way from the side of the house to water the hanging plants on the front porch. A few minutes later, you can see Susan's 2 boys in the background, splashing and yelling in a big inflatable pool in the backyard. She's doing chores in the hot sun while they're playing in the water. The image was so vivid, so cruel, it made my stomach clench. "There's more," she said. "I have a clip from just a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday. Molly is outside sweeping the front porch, and you can hear Susan's voice, clear as a bell, coming from the open front door. She's yelling, 'If you don't finish that before I count to 20, you're not getting any dinner.' The camera's microphone picked it up perfectly. It's time-stamped. It's unedited. It's the truth, Mrs. Harris." Tears welled in my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, profound relief. It was the truth. It was hard, undeniable, electronic proof. It was the rock that would shatter Susan's carefully constructed house of glass. "Martha," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you have no idea what you've just done." I immediately called Ismael Vega. I could hear the sharp intake of his breath as I told him about Martha Nguyen and her Ring camera footage. The cautious calm in his voice was replaced by a surge of pure electric energy. "This is it, Julia," he said. "This is the silver bullet. Her entire defense is built on the claim that you coached Molly and manipulated the audio. This footage is objective. It's a third-party witness that cannot be accused of being suggestible. It corroborates everything. We're changing our strategy. We're going on the offensive." The next morning, we did not go to the courthouse for the emergency hearing. Instead, we went to a conference room in Ismael Vega's law firm, which had been set up for a press conference. The room was packed with reporters and television cameras, the same vultures who had been camped outside my condo, now invited to the feast. I sat at a long table with Vega by my side. I was terrified, my hands trembling in my lap, but I looked out at the sea of faces and cameras and thought of Molly. My fear was nothing compared to hers. Vega stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding the room into an immediate silence. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and authoritative. "We are here today to respond to the baseless and defamatory allegations made by Ms. Susan Harris. Yesterday, she presented a fictional narrative to the public, a story in which she is the victim. Today, we are here to present the facts." What followed was a masterful, systematic demolition of Susan's entire story. Vega started by playing the unedited Ring camera clips on a large screen for everyone to see. First, the video of Molly struggling with the garden hose, the sounds of the other boys laughing and splashing from the backyard, a sickening counterpoint. Then, the second clip. The image of the small girl dutifully sweeping the porch, followed by Susan's voice, sharp and clear, echoing from the open doorway. "No dinner if you don't finish." A stunned murmur went through the room. This wasn't a he said, she said anymore. This was a home movie of casual cruelty. Vega let the images sink in. "What you have just seen," he said, his voice cold as steel, "is a pattern of abuse. It is not discipline. It is not teaching life skills. It is the targeted exploitation of a 6-year-old child. And this evidence is not coached. It is not manipulated. It is time-stamped reality." He then put up a slide with stills from the video next to photos of Molly's hands from the pediatrician's visit, red, raw, and chapped. "These are not the hands of a child who does normal chores," he stated. "These are the hands of a child forced to perform manual labor." He presented the doctor's notes, highlighting the phrases anxious demeanor and appears withdrawn. He was building the case not with emotion, but with an avalanche of irrefutable, documented facts. The police report from the night of the showdown at my condo. Celeste Brown's signed, notarized affidavit detailing the months of screaming she had overheard. The screenshots of Susan's own threatening, unhinged text messages to me. Then came the final, devastating blow. A side door opened, and Rick walked into the room. He looked better than he had in his confession video. He was clean-shaven, wearing a simple button-down shirt, but his face was etched with a profound, bone-deep sorrow. He walked to the podium, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped its sides. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at me. "Everything, Mr. Vega has shown you is the truth," he said, his voice quiet but steady, carrying across the silent room. "I was there. I let it happen. The video I posted was not coerced. It was a desperate attempt to tell the truth, a truth I had been too cowardly to face for years. My wife, Susan, she is lying. She lied to me, she lied to the world on television, and she is lying to herself. My mother, Julia, is not a manipulator. She is a hero. She did the job of a parent when I failed to. She saved my little girl." He finally looked out at the press, his eyes pleading. "Please," he said, "stop treating this like a soap opera. This is about a little girl who deserves to be safe, and she is only safe with her grandmother. That is the only truth that matters." He stepped away from the podium and sat down, his head bowed. The narrative didn't just flip, it shattered. The room exploded with questions as reporters scrambled to file their stories. Susan's polished performance, her lavender sweater, her crocodile tears, it had all been annihilated by a tidal wave of hard evidence. Her denials had collapsed. Her credibility was in ruins. We had taken her media strategy and turned it against her. She had wanted to fight this in the court of public opinion, and now she had just been tried and convicted. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had just been won. And as I looked at my son, my broken, repentant son, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. A painful, complicated, but undeniable glimmer of hope. The press conference was a nuclear bomb detonated in the center of Susan's carefully constructed world. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Within an hour, the Ring camera clips and Rick's corroborating statements were the leading story on every news site. The public, which had been momentarily swayed by her performance, turned on her with the ferocity of a betrayed mob. She wasn't just a villain anymore. She was a proven liar. Her new lawyer, the so-called shark Marcus Thorne, dropped her as a client by the end of the day, issuing a curt statement about irreconcilable differences. He was a creature of the media, and he knew a losing cause when he saw one. For a full day, there was only silence from Susan's camp. The emergency hearing was postponed indefinitely. The motion to have Molly evaluated for suggestibility was quietly withdrawn. It felt like a victory, but it was an unnerving, precarious one. Ismael Vega warned me to be on guard. "A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, Julia," he'd said. "She has nothing left to lose. Don't underestimate her desperation." His words proved prophetic. The following afternoon, as Molly and I were building a surprisingly sturdy pillow fort in the hotel living room, I received a frantic call. It was Rick. "She's gone," he said, his voice ragged with panic. "Mom, she's gone, and she took the boys. She said..." I sat bolt upright, the pillow I was holding tumbling to the floor. "What do you mean, gone, Richard?" "I came back to the house to pack some more of my things," he explained, his words tumbling over one another. "The foreclosure is final in a week. She was supposed to be out, but the house is empty. Her car is gone. All her clothes, the boys' clothes, their toys, it's all gone. There's a note on the kitchen counter." "What does it say?" I asked, my blood running cold. It says, "You and your mother think you can take my family away from me. You'll never see us again." His voice broke on the last few words. "Mom, what has she done?" My mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. This wasn't just a panicked flight. This was a calculated, desperate gambit. She had lost in the court of law. She had lost in the court of public opinion. So, she had decided to make her own rules, to disappear off the grid and take her sons with her. It was an act of supreme, selfish defiance. I immediately called Vega. He listened to the story without interruption, his calm a stark contrast to my rising panic. "Okay, Julia," he said when I had finished. "This is a serious development, but it's not an unexpected one. It's called custodial interference, and it is a felony. I'm contacting the police and CPS right now. We'll have an alert issued. Rick needs to stay at the house and cooperate fully with the officers who will be dispatched there." The next few hours were a blur of anxious waiting. The police issued a bolo be on the lookout for Susan's car. Her face, no longer the polished, sympathetic victim from the television interview, was now part of a stark, official police alert. She was no longer a media villain. She was a fugitive. I tried to shield Molly from the tension, but she was an intuitive child. She knew something was wrong. She grew quiet again, her small face clouded with a worry she couldn't name. She sat close to me on the couch, her little hand resting on my arm, as if she were the one trying to comfort me. The call came late that night. It was a detective from the Cedar Grove Police Department. "Mrs. Harris," he said, his voice all business, "we've located her." A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. "The boys? Are they okay?" "The boys are fine, ma'am," he confirmed. "She's at her brother's property. It's a rural address about an hour outside of Dayton. We have local sheriff's deputies monitoring the location, but she's refusing to come out, and she's made a demand." My stomach tightened again. "What demand?" "She says she'll only talk to you, Mrs. Harris," the detective said. "She says she wants to negotiate." My first instinct was a visceral, absolute no. I wanted nothing to do with her. I wanted the police to handle it, to drag her out in handcuffs if they had to. But Vega, whom I immediately conferenced into the call, saw it differently. "This is an opportunity, Julia," he said, his voice low and strategic. "She's trying to regain a sliver of control, to make herself a central player again. We can use that. Let her talk. But we set the terms." Over the next 30 minutes, Vega orchestrated the situation with the precision of a field marshal. He arranged a secure recorded line through the police department. He would be on the line, listening to every word, along with the detective. I would be the only one speaking to Susan. My objective was clear: de-escalate, secure the safe release of Chase and Tony, and make no concessions whatsoever regarding Molly. When the call was finally connected, I took a deep, steadying breath. I thought of the little girl sleeping peacefully in the next room, a testament to what was at stake. "Susan," I said, my voice as neutral and calm as I could make it. "It's Julia." There was a moment of silence on the other end, then her voice, stripped of all its media polish, raw and ragged with exhaustion and fury. "So you finally decided to talk to me. Are you happy now, Julia? Are you happy that you've destroyed my life?" "This isn't about your life, Susan," I said, keeping my voice even, refusing to take the bait. "This is about the children. This is about Chase and Tony. You need to let them go." "They are my sons!" she shrieked, and I could hear the hysteria bubbling just beneath the surface. "You are not taking them from me, too." "No one is taking them from you," I said, choosing my words with care, channeling the calm I had learned from Vega. "But you have put them in a terrible, frightening position. They are surrounded by police, Susan. This has to end. It has to end peacefully for their sake." "It will end when I get what I want," she shot back. "I want you to drop the custody case. I want Molly back. We can go back to the way things were." And the sheer delusion of her demand was staggering. She still believed she could rewind time, that she could erase the press conference, the Ring camera, the police reports, and go back to her reign of quiet tyranny. "That is not going to happen, Susan," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Molly's placement is not negotiable. She is safe and she is staying with me. That is final. But we can talk about Chase and Tony. We can talk about you." I was taking a risk, offering an olive branch I wasn't sure she would accept. "If you surrender peacefully right now," I continued, "if you let the boys go and turn yourself in, I will have my attorney speak to the prosecutor on your behalf. We will tell them you cooperated. We will advocate for leniency. I will promise you that, once this is all settled, you will have supervised visitation with your sons. You will not lose your children, Susan, but you are going to, if you don't end this now." I was offering her a path out of the corner she had backed herself into, a way to save face, a way to maintain a connection with her children. It was a concession, but one that cost me nothing in the fight for Molly. There was a long, tense silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, a ragged, uneven sound. She was weighing her options, her desperate, dwindling options. She could continue this standoff, which would inevitably end with her arrest and the traumatic removal of her children. Or she could take the small, fragile lifeline I was offering her. "Supervised?" she finally whispered, the fight draining out of her voice, replaced by the first tremor of defeat. "Yes," I said softly. "To start, to rebuild trust, for the good of the boys. They need their mother, Susan, but they need her to be safe and stable." I could hear a muffled sob. The dam had finally broken. The rage had been exhausted, and all that was left was the hollow, aching reality of her situation. She had lost. She had lost the house, she had lost Rick, she had lost her reputation, and she had lost Molly. All she had left were her 2 boys, and she was on the verge of losing them too. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Okay." The call ended. I sat in the silent hotel room, the receiver still pressed to my ear, my body trembling with the release of a tension I hadn't even realized I was holding. Vega and the detective came back on the line, their voices filled with a mixture of relief and professional admiration. An hour later, the detective called back. Susan had surrendered. She had walked out of the house with her hands up. Chase and Tony were safe and were being taken to their aunt's home in Columbus. It was over. The final, desperate gambit had failed. I walked into the bedroom and looked down at Molly. She had stirred in her sleep and kicked off her blankets. I gently pulled the comforter back up to her chin. Her face was so peaceful, so untroubled. She was completely unaware of the frantic high-stakes drama that had just played out, a drama in which she was the silent, central figure. I stood there for a long time, watching her breathe. Susan had demanded to negotiate, to get something in return for her surrender. But she had been negotiating with the wrong person. I had nothing left to give her, and nothing she could take from me. The only thing of value in this entire sordid affair was the little girl sleeping in this bed, and she was non-negotiable. She was safe. The war was finally, truly over. The end of a war is never a clean, simple thing. It's a slow, messy process of counting the casualties, clearing the rubble, and cautiously beginning to rebuild. After Susan's surrender, the media frenzy died down, replaced by the quiet, methodical turning of the wheels of justice. The sensational headlines faded, and our family tragedy was processed through the sterile, dispassionate machinery of the family court and the criminal justice system. The family court hearing, when it finally happened, was almost a formality. Armed with the Ring camera footage, the police reports, the witness statements, and Rick's own public and private testimony, Ismael Vega laid out a case that was not just compelling, it was irrefutable. Susan was present, a shadow of her former self. Her new, court-appointed lawyer put up a token defense, but her heart wasn't in it. The evidence was too overwhelming. Susan sat silent and pale, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. She looked smaller, stripped of her righteous anger, a queen deposed and left with nothing. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything, granted me permanent legal and physical custody of Molly without hesitation. Her ruling was a quiet affirmation of everything I had fought for. "It is the opinion of this court," she stated, her voice ringing with clarity in the quiet courtroom, that the child's physical and emotional well-being was placed in significant jeopardy. The child's grandmother, Mrs. Julia Harris, has demonstrated a profound and protective love and is, without question, the safest and most stable placement for her. Rick received supervised weekend visitation. It was a painful but necessary step. He was a broken man, but in his brokenness, there was a glimmer of something new, humility. He accepted the court's terms without argument. He enrolled in court-mandated therapy and parenting classes, not as a punishment, but with a quiet, desperate sincerity. He was beginning the long, arduous process of trying to become the father Molly had always deserved. Child Protective Services, as expected, kept a case plan open, a lingering official oversight to ensure we all stayed on the right path. Susan's fate was decided in a different, colder courtroom. She was convicted of felony child endangerment for the pattern of abuse and misdemeanor custodial interference for her desperate flight with the boys. The prosecutor, true to the deal I had brokered, acknowledged her cooperation in the final standoff. She was spared a long prison term, receiving a short state sentence of 90 days in a county facility, followed by 3 years of probation and her own mandated counseling. It felt inadequate. A few months of her freedom in exchange for years of a child's stolen peace. But Vega reminded me that the real punishment was not the jail time. It was the loss of control, the public dismantling of her life, and the strict court oversight that would now govern her relationship with her own sons. Chase and Tony went to live with Susan's sister in Columbus, a kind, stable woman who was horrified by what had transpired. Under the court's supervision, she began the difficult work of helping them heal, and slowly of mending the fractured bridge between them and Molly. And so, the war ended. The legal battles were over, the consequences delivered. We were left in the quiet aftermath, tasked with building a new life from the wreckage of the old one. 1 year later, the seasons had turned. The harsh, clarifying light of that terrible autumn had given way to the quiet snow of winter, the tentative buds of spring, and now the lush, green warmth of a new summer. We no longer lived in the anonymous safety of the downtown hotel or the lonely elegance of my condo. I had sold my place in the city and bought a small house, a cozy little cottage with a tiny, sun-drenched backyard at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't a grand, impressive new build like the house in Cedar Grove. It was small and a little old and utterly perfect. It was our home. Molly, now 7, was a different child. The quiet, haunted little ghost I had led out of that house a year ago was gone. In her place was a bright, giggling, wonderfully ordinary little girl. The physical changes were the most obvious. Her hands had healed, no longer red and chapped, but soft and smooth, often smudged with dirt from the garden or streaks of paint from her art projects. She had grown 3 inches. Her face, once pale and drawn, was now dotted with a light spray of freckles from playing in the sun. But the real transformation was on the inside. The fear was gone, the flinching at loud noises, the hypervigilance, the constant anxious need to please it, had all slowly melted away, replaced by the easy confidence of a child who knows she is loved unconditionally. Her laughter was no longer a rare, precious sound, but the daily, joyful soundtrack of our home. She was playing in the backyard now, her dark hair flying as she chased a bright yellow butterfly through the small patch of grass. Captain Buttons, the one-eyed bear, sat watching from the steps of the back porch. I sat at the small patio table, a cup of iced tea in my hand, watching her. This was my life now. This quiet, beautiful peace. This was what I had fought for. Rick came every Saturday. His visits were still supervised, but not by a court-appointed official. I was the supervisor. It was awkward at first, a strained, painful dance of regret and forgiveness, but slowly we were finding a new rhythm. He didn't try to force things. He let Molly lead. He would sit on the floor and play with her dolls. He would push her on the swing I had installed on the big oak tree in the backyard. He would listen, really listen, when she told him about her week at school. He was learning, slowly and painfully, how to be a father. He was learning that fatherhood wasn't about authority or discipline. It was about presence. He was finally showing up. A few weeks ago, Chase had called. It was the first time we'd heard from either of the boys directly. His voice was hesitant, the old adolescent swagger gone, replaced by a new, uncertain maturity. He had apologized. "For being a jerk," he'd said. He asked if Molly would be willing to read a letter from him. She had. And then, at his request, she had sat down at the kitchen table with a purple crayon and a piece of construction paper and had written a letter back to Susan. It was a child's letter, full of misspelled words and simple, profound grace. It said, "Dear Susan, I hope you are okay. I forgive you. Love, Molly." Forgiving, not because Susan deserved it, but because Molly's own heart was too bright to be weighed down by the darkness of resentment. She was healing, not just for herself, but for all of us. I looked down at the table, at the letter still sitting there, waiting to be mailed. I thought about the core of it all, about how silence, the thing I had once mistaken for peace, had been the fertile ground in which the abuse had grown. My desire to keep the family together, to avoid conflict, to maintain the appearance of normalcy, it had nearly cost my granddaughter her spirit. I had learned, in the hardest way possible, that true love is not about comfort. It is not about keeping the peace. It is about protection. It is about drawing boundaries, hard and clear and absolute, and defending them fiercely. It is about choosing the difficult, messy, painful truth over the easy, comfortable lie. The screen door creaked open, and Molly came running onto the patio, her face flushed and happy. She threw her arms around my neck, her small body warm against mine. "The butterfly got away, Grandma," she said, her voice a little breathless. I hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of sunshine and cut grass in her hair. "That's okay, sweetheart," I whispered into her ear. "There will be other butterflies." And in that small, perfect moment, I knew it was true. The trauma was a part of her story, a part of our story, and it always would be. But it was no longer the whole story. The wounding had led to an awakening. The awakening had led to a counterattack. And the counterattack had led to this: liberation. For both of us. We were free. And in the warm, gentle light of the afternoon sun, we were finally, truly, home. This story is a stark reminder that silence in the face of cruelty is not neutrality. It's complicity. True love isn't about maintaining a fragile peace or preserving appearances at all costs. It is a fierce, protective force that demands action, sets hard boundaries, and chooses the difficult truth over comfortable lies. It shows that it is never too late to find your voice and fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Wounding can lead to awakening, and the bravest act is to stop enabling harm and instead build a sanctuary founded on safety, accountability, and genuine love. Now, if you liked this story, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me which part surprised you the most. Each subscription and comment from you is a great motivation for us to keep sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you very much.